From the Ear to There Travel Studio, this is the Ear to There Disney Podcast.
Welcome aboard the Ear to There Podcast, the podcast that'll help you vacation like a pro in any Disney destination. For those of you standing, please sit down and hold on throughout our journey and get ready to learn how to have the time of your life. And now, here's your host, Phil Gramlich.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Can't stop, you won't stop, don't stop. That did not start off well. Welcome to this week's episode of the Ear to There podcast. I am your host, Phil Gramlich. I'm also the owner and operator of Ear to There Travel, which is a Disney specialized travel agency. You may have noticed that the episode for this title says Part 2. So if you haven't yet heard my Part 1 of the interview with author Jim Denney, that was on episode 84. Go back and check that one out. But this is episode 85. And it's again for the week of August 21st, 2017. Now, grab a drink, grab a snack, and as a famous mouse once said, on with the show. Previously on the Ear to There podcast. I just love doing that. That's a lot of fun. I don't get the chance to say that much because I don't do a whole lot of two-part shows. And this one was actually separated by a couple weeks, but I wanted to bring them to you back to back right away because I had so many questions still that I didn't get to ask author of Walt Disneyland, Jim Denney, last time, that I had to have him back on the show. So here we go with episode 85, part 2 of my conversation with author and all-around super nice guy, Mr. Jim Denney. Enjoy. My guest this week is one that we had so much to talk about last week that I had to have him come back to talk some more. I had literally another page of questions to ask that we didn't get to. So he is the author of Walt's Disneyland. It's still there if you know where to look. Jim Denney, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Phil, thanks so much for having me back.
No, I'm so excited to have you back. And like I said, I just scratched the surface last time, and I was kind of joking with you earlier, and I said, I want people to buy your book. I don't want to give away every single story and every single secret, but I still had so much to talk to you about. So thank you so much for coming back on. I appreciate it.
Sure, thank you.
So, okay, I wanted to start, again, another thing I was telling you was people tell me, do the podcast you want to listen to that you would want to hear, not the one that you think people would want to hear. So I know you did a book. Was it Reggie Whites' autobiography that you, or I forget the right.
Yeah, I worked with Reggie on a book called, it was called In the Trenches, and it was his autobiography, and he laid out for me everything that he wanted in it, and my job was to interview him and take all the material that he gave to me and then organize it, edit that into a book. And I met with him in April of 1996, and you may remember that arsonists burned down his church. He was a pastor, one of the pastors of the inner city church there in Knoxville. And in January of 96, the arsonists burned down this church. I was there, I believe, in April, and they were at that time meeting in a junior high, and he was just a prince of a guy. I brought some Reggie White football cards, both Eagles and Packers, and he signed them for my kids, with a Bible verse and his signature. And then I got to go with them to a Wednesday night service, and he preached. I still remember it was a message about Jesus clearing the money changers out of the temple, and we all joined hands and sang "We Shall Overcome" together. It was just an amazing experience. I really, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a wonderful experience. And he told me about, it was just the previous, it was, I think it was November of 1995. He pulled the hamstring, or actually tore the hamstring in a game against the Browns. And they thought it was going to be a season-ending injury, and they were scheduling him up to have surgery to reattach the hamstring. And so it's early December 1995, and he is playing with his kids, and he has a lot of trouble moving that leg because there's just no strength in it because the ligament's detached. And then all of a sudden, while he's playing with his kids, he feels the strength come back into that leg, and he goes and he exercises it some more, and he feels it getting stronger and stronger. And he said, look at this. You can see that the muscle's still bunched up. See, he never had the surgery that they were going to have. He just went over to Coach Holmgren's house, and Coach Holmgren was coming out of his house. It was late at night, I think about 10 at night. Coach comes out of his house. There's Reggie standing there, and Coach just about jumps out of his skin. Because Reggie's standing there, he had come out to turn off the Christmas lights on his house, and Reggie was there, and Coach said, "Reggie, you scared me. I thought it was Santa Claus." And Reggie said, "Well, I think it is Santa Claus because I tell you, Coach, I think I can play." And it was the most amazing thing. He never had the surgery. He had this miraculous healing. He wasn't even praying for a healing, but he said everybody was praying for him. And so he said God just healed him, and he was able to play even though that hamstring muscle was detached, the ligament was detached. And so that was an amazing thing just to have him tell me that story, show me the leg where you could see the muscle bunched up and everything. It was just working with Reggie was just an incredible experience. And then, of course, it was such a shock when he passed away in 2004, the day after Christmas, 2004. But just an amazing human being.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that day being shocked as well. He, for me, I know he went on to Green Bay and won the Super Bowl out there, and but to me, he's an Eagle forever. He was, and I was just telling you that the Eagles are on right now as we're recording. It's their first preseason game, and I'm DVRing it so I can watch it tonight. Hopefully, I'll stay up to watch. I just need to watch about the first half, then I'll go to bed. But
well, he continued to love the Eagles fans, and the fans loved him even after he left.
Yeah, he did, and he left basically because they wouldn't pay. They didn't pay him. I mean, I remember the whole thing. Like God told me to go to Green Bay and all that, and but it was because they had. I believe it was Norman Bremen was their owner at the time, and
I believe so.
He wasn't going to pay him, and Reggie, you can't blame the guy for going, and of course he went to a contender. They won a Super Bowl, and good for him. I don't think there's one Eagles fan, and I'm a big Eagles fan. I don't think there's one that would say they ever held a grudge against Reggie for leaving.
No,
but he was, man, what an incredible player, incredible guy, and yeah, it was sad. I remember it was sad for me when he left, and then when he passed away, it was even sadder. He was on those teams with Jerome Brown, who of course passed away, and Andre Waters again, another guy who had the whole CTE thing and ended up committing suicide, and just really it kind of brings it all kind of to light now that what these guys go through.
Oh yeah,
I mean it's I think now my son's 4, and again this is completely off the track where I usually go on the show, but. My son's 4. I don't think he's going to play football. I just don't think I can, in good conscience, say, okay, go smash your head and get CTE when you're, what if he ends up being really good? And then I have to make that decision. I think we're going to stick with hockey and baseball. And he likes that now. He likes baseball. And I think, although we did go to a Phillies game, his first one, and it was about 85 degrees, and we didn't get it. We had no shade in our seats where we were sitting in. About an inning and a half in, he was like, "Dad, you ready?" I was like, "Oh, we got 8 innings left of this. We're sticking around. I paid $60 for your seat. We're staying." But yeah, it's such a cool. Must have been such a cool thing to work with Reggie, and he was just an amazing guy, and like you said, from everything I've ever heard, the nicest guy on the planet. But man, was he a nasty football player. He was a nasty guy on the field.
Yeah.
Just physically, I heard a story with Phil Sims. I think it was Phil Sims. And he cursed at Reggie on the field. he said it. He called him a name or something after maybe a sack or a late hit, and then Reggie just beat him up all game. Like after he heard it, because Reggie was a guy that you don't curse in front of.
Yeah,
and he was a very Christian man, and you don't curse like Brian Dawkins was for the Eagles later. You don't curse in front of guys like that, and I remember he sacked him, I don't know, 3 times that game and beat him up, hit him late all day. And then they ran into each other at the Pro Bowl a few months later, and Phil Simms came up to Reggie and was like, listen, you really put a beating on me that game. And Reggie said, I want to apologize, but when you said that word, he said, I just lost my cool. And I loved it. I thought that was such a cool story. Yeah. There's this guy who, again, is the nicest guy on the planet, but man, don't get on his bad side.
Yeah.
So
I'll tell you something else amazing about Reggie was that when I was working with him, he said that the Packers were going to win it all that season. They were going to go to the Super Bowl and they were going to win it. And that is an incredible, I mean, even as good as the Packers were, that is a cold shot kind of the Babe Ruth variety, you know? And I said, do you want to put that prediction in the book? And he said, yeah, put it in the book. And so we did.
Oh, wow.
And lo and behold, he did it, you know, Super Bowl 31.
Wow, that's Babe Ruth, Joe Namath guarantee right there.
Oh, yeah. That was, and he got the game-ending sack. Beat the Patriots, what was it, 35-21, I think it was.
That was the Drew Bledsoe Patriots, I guess, still? Or was that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it was Bledsoe.
All right, so let's get to Disney. Let's get back to Walt. Because
absolutely, yeah, let's talk about Walt.
Because you and I could talk Reggie White and football for another hour. So what I wanted to get to last time, what I didn't get to was kind of going around the park, and then we got to it a little bit, but I was jumping around so much, so I wanted to kind of go around the park in different lands and see what's still there that Walt Disney actually touched or worked on or oversaw. So I wanted to start at Main Street USA, and I think we talked a bit about the Main Street vehicles last time, about the omnibus and about the fire engine that Bob Gurr took. I talked to him. I had him on last week on the show, and he takes ownership of that fire engine. He still says to this day that's his. And it was his idea to build that fire engine. I got to hear it directly from him, so that was cool.
Yeah, but, I heard that podcast, and that was great hearing that from him.
Thank you. Yeah, it was so cool. Yeah. And I was like, I have to make sure I ask Bob about the fire truck and he said he drove it down was it the 5 freeway in California? Am I getting that right? Yeah.
The Santa Ana freeway.
That's right.
Which is the 5 today, but I don't think it was called that back then. But they built it at the studio in Burbank, and he drove it down the freeway to Anaheim, and it's been there ever since.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, they had a horse-drawn fire wagon that they used for the first 5 years or so, but then they've got that motorized one that Bob built, and it was Bob's idea. He suggested it to Walt. Everything else was Walt's idea, and as I understood it, Bob was kind of thinking that you really can't suggest things to Walt. It sort of everything has to originate with Walt, but he was able to get that idea into Walt's head, and then Walt said, sure, go ahead. And then the next thing he knows, he's got the money appropriated for it.
I love that story that he said that Walt left his office, and like 30 minutes later, he gets a phone call that says, here's the order number for the fire engine that you're building. I was like, that is so cool that quickly, that Walt was on it.
Yeah.
And the one thing I read in your book that I wasn't aware of, it's weird because I've never seen it in person, but I've seen it in videos and maybe I think I saw it on an episode of Modern Family, was the 4-seater bicycle that the Dapper Dans ride on.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, tell me. I just want to know about that.
Well, I've never seen that either, but I know that Walt ordered that, and I think I've seen pictures of it, but and I've read about it and so forth. But when I'm in the park, I've seen the Dapper Dans a number of times. I've never seen him on the bike, so I've just haven't been in there at the right time.
Yeah, it's funny. Like the Main Street vehicles, like I mentioned, if you go early in the morning, they're just everywhere.
Yeah,
like you see them I feel like every 10 feet there's another one, which I love. And I know we talked about it last week that you haven't been to Walt Disney World, which I am going to see to it personally that we make that happen. Because I got to get your reaction when you see those parks.
Oh, that'd be great.
I mean, really, like, to me, when I first went to Disneyland, it was very much like a bizarro Magic Kingdom for me. I can't imagine what, after growing up with Disneyland, you would feel walking into the Magic Kingdom. I have to know. So we got to set that up. But
because it would be so similar and yet so different.
It's exactly right. It's so different. Like, I've been to Disneyland, I think I've been on 5 trips. I've probably been walked through the gates of that park. Yeah. I don't even know, 25 times, because that's the one I gravitate toward. Yeah. And I do my, run in and do my attractions at California Adventure, but Disneyland is where I spend the bulk of my time. And I know the park well now, but there are so many like little dead ends and things that kind of don't make sense in the park. Whereas Walt Disney World, everything is like basically one big circle, and everything except for the area in Frontierland where Splash Mountain and then Thunder Mountain are, that kind of dead ends in Magic Kingdom. But Disneyland has so many dead ends. It's weird to kind of be there and not like know where you're going, but then again not know where you're going. So yeah, you got to get that feeling, and you have to see Epcot and Animal Kingdom and Hollywood.
Sure. You
should wait till 2019 though, because you're not going to want to go to Hollywood Studios now. It's a lot of construction walls up, as I'm sure you're used to out in Disneyland with Star Wars Land coming.
Oh, sure.
But one thing I wanted to ask you that we didn't talk about last time was we talked about Walt's apartment, and we talked. I don't think we talked about this. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I've talked about this with a couple of people, but the statue outside on the patio in Walt's apartment. Did we talk about the girl, the child statue that's outside there?
No. And I'm not aware of that because I haven't been back there. Okay,
right. So this is what I wanted to. So maybe if you can't shed any light on it, I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on this. So there's a little stone statue, maybe 2 or I have my hand out trying to measure, like you can see it, but it's like 2 or 3 feet tall, 2.5 feet tall probably, and it sits right outside the door to the patio of Walt's apartment that overlooks Town Square. And we were told by our guide that there used to be 2. There were one on either side of the door, and Walt loved them. He picked them out himself. So when he passed away, they actually moved one to his burial site. So one sits there outside his apartment, and his other one is at the cemetery at Forest Lawn Cemetery where he's buried. So I thought that was kind of cool. I just wanted to I didn't know if you had heard that, or if that was true or not. That's just what we heard from our guide.
Never heard that before, and I'm glad you told me about that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe maybe she was trying to kill time and made it up, but I think it's probably true. So that was a cool story.
It sure is.
So, like I said, I don't want to give away your whole book, but let's move on to Adventureland and the Jungle Cruise, because I know Walt had a ton to do with that attraction, going back to the fact that he wanted actual live animals on that attraction. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of it and kind of how that came about?
He took that trip to South America in 1941. He had to get away from all the strike and everything that was going on at the studio, and so he was invited by, it was actually Nelson Rockefeller on behalf of the State Department during the FDR administration, invited him to go on this goodwill tour down to Latin America. And so he took he took his wife and a bunch of illustrators or animators and so forth down there to learn from the Latin American culture and so forth, and to do a lot of drawings and meet the people. And so he had a wonderful experience. And one of the things that he did was he went on this cruise in Colombia on a river there, and on a boat that was very much like the Jungle Cruise boats at the attraction. And also, those boats are kind of, my understanding is that they're patterned a bit after the boat that was in the motion picture, the African Queen, with Humphrey Bogart. But anyway, that was sort of the genesis of it. It was a nostalgic thing for Walt. A lot of the attractions, if you look at the attractions that Walt originated, they have some sort of nostalgic connection with some period in his life. And the Jungle Cruise was no exception. That's something that he remembered very fondly, that whole trip. And he wanted to sort of encapsulate that into this attraction at Disneyland, and it's still a lot of people's one of their favorite attractions.
Yeah, it's still, and it's really what's there's not a whole lot different about the attraction from what I can understand. I mean, the spiel and the script has changed, because it's gotten a lot funnier, and the skippers are a much bigger part of the show than they were back in the day, which I think really though it makes the experience now.
Yes,
I mean, it really does.
I love it.
Yeah.
His original idea was to make this sort of an educational kind of thing, and the original spiel was more educational, but it became with just touches of humor, but it's gotten more it's full of puns and jokes and the backside of water and things like that. But everybody loves it.
Yeah, I heard one. We were on a Jungle Cruise in Disneyland a few weeks ago. And again, my kids had never been on the one in Disneyland, so I was so excited.
Yeah.
Our skipper was excellent. She was so funny. And that's one attraction, I think, where your skipper makes it. Like, either if you have a great one, it's a phenomenal experience. If you don't, you're kind of like, all right. But because at this point, the animatronics on the attraction are, not cutting edge or not state of the art. That element of the skipper being funny really adds so much. Yeah. And I remember there was one point where we were stuck waiting to move ahead and so we were just kind of sitting in the middle of the jungle, and she says, I'm going to take this moment while we're sitting here to point out a few of my favorite plants. Like that one right there, and that one. And oh yeah, that one right there. And I thought that was so good. And I was dying. On this. And I'm such a Disney nerd because I'm cracking up at this joke. And the people around me are just staring at me. I don't know if they weren't listening or what, but I was just such a good joke. So, it really, they make it or they break it for you. And I think it's that position, that role in Disneyland has become one of the most coveted attraction roles you can get.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants to add that little showmanship. I'm sure if you're a Hollywood kind of, wannabe actor and you're working in Disneyland, that's the one you would want to work at.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a fun attraction. And, of course, it spawned two of my favorite places in both Disneyland and Walt Disney World, Trader Sam's. I love both of those bars. I love them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you've been to the one out there in,
no, just been by it.
That's one of my. It's just an entertaining, fun. It's hard to get in there though. That's the problem. If you go anywhere near a weekend, absolutely forget about it. Yeah. But Jim, I have to tell you, this is my craziness. I don't know if I told you this last time we talked. I'm building a Trader Sam's in my house. This
great.
This isn't. I've told the listeners this actually, and we were actually starting it in September. I just cleared out the first half of my garage. I'm talking to you right now from. I converted to an office/studio. The second half of my garage, actually the 2/3 of my garage, we are converting into our own Trader Sam's.
That's tremendous.
I've been buying things off Amazon and Etsy and all kind of decorations for the walls for like 2 years. Yeah. So we're gonna put it together, and I'm gonna start doing my live broadcasts from my own little tiny personal Trader Sam's. So yeah, that's if you want to know how far the madness goes in my head. It goes pretty far. Yeah. So if you ever meet anyone who're like, oh, that guy likes Disney, I'm way worse than that guy. Another thing that you mentioned in a book one thing I didn't know was, and I thought maybe I had read it before, but I didn't remember reading it. Maybe, I don't know. The Enchanted Tiki Room, I guess, now I can't remember. Was it originally called the Enchanted Tiki Room at Disneyland?
Yeah, it was Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room, and it was originally separately owned by Walt, by his company.
Right. Yeah, I did. I learned that from reading your book. And also I learned it's the only attraction that has bathrooms built in.
Yeah.
Which I had heard the story behind, but I didn't know that's why I never knew that the bathrooms were actually built for the reason that he actually had different plans for that when they built it. Can you talk a little bit about? Well, I'm fascinated by this idea of what Tiki Room was actually supposed to be. Right.
It was originally supposed to be a restaurant, and as they were developing it, the animatronics were becoming so fantastic and impressive, and the show was, as they were developing the show and the music and the dialogue and everything, Walt began to think, people are going to be sitting there eating and not paying attention to the show. It's a shame that all of this wonderful entertainment is going to be lost on them because they're going to be absorbed in eating their dinner. So he decided then to just fill the place with chairs instead of making it a restaurant. There's still a lot of remnants of the original restaurant concept to it, and one of those remnants is the restroom, the two restrooms that are just off the lanai area, the pre-show area. And I have not used those restrooms, but my understanding is that they're comparatively small. And so, as I understand it, they are the only restrooms in the park that don't have changing tables for babies. But other than that, because most people don't know about it, they're good restrooms to use because they're not very highly trafficked.
Yeah, what's funny is I took my son in one a few weeks ago because I forgot they were there.
They are small?
They are. I think it was 2 stalls in it. I was going to compare it to an Epcot restaurant that I know of, but I can't because I told you I got to get you over there. But there's a couple stalls and a couple of sinks, and that's pretty much it. But yeah, there was nobody in there because I think the locals know it's there. Obviously, people like me don't. So when you have like people like me that go, I saw someone coming out of it, and I was like, "That's right! I read that there's a bathroom in there." So I took my son in because they were all eating their Dole Whips, which is another thing that's cool. There is you can get the Dole Whip after you walk into like the waiting area, kind of the pre-show area of the attraction. There's a secondary line for the Dole Whips in there, which I've been told was kind of a secret for Disney, like the California folks. But we know about it now, us non-Californians. So I walked in and got in line, and we waited in a much shorter line. So that was cool.
The line outside is pretty long, but you go inside there to wait for the show, and it's a nice, comfortable, quick wait.
Yeah, the one outside has like a queue.
Yeah.
There's a roped-off queue up for it, and we went inside, and I was like the second person in line. So yeah, it was nice.
And that walkway through Adventureland is a very busy walkway.
It is, and I was surprised. There's one thing that surprised me walking through Adventureland there is right by the Bengal barbecue, there's an enormous tree that's right in the middle of the pathway. Mm-hmm. It's a huge planter with a huge tree that obviously has been there probably since the 50s. And I was surprised that it was there only for traffic reasons. Mm-hmm. And then maybe another 20 or so feet, there's another planter with another tree. It's smaller, but it's still there.
Yeah.
And I talked to a friend of mine who told me who works there, who told me that they used to use that area between the two trees as stroller parking up until really recently. And then they emptied out the 2 storefronts next to the Bengal barbecue, and now they have indoor seating in there, which, by the way, is awesome to have that seating for Bengal barbecue. Because I remember a couple years ago going and having to sit outside to the left of the Bengal barbecue queue and never being a table there. You had to walk with your food. Now there's plenty of seating. You can sit down. It's air conditioned, and man, that was great. And you can't beat Bengal barbecue. I love their food in there. Yeah, we got the Banyan beef skewer, And
it's great.
Oh, it's the best. And the pork belly skewer is the new one. We tried that for research purposes only, of course, and it was excellent. So, yeah, it was really, really good. That's one thing about Disneyland is the food is phenomenal.
Yes, it is.
I have to ask you, favorite food? Do you have one? Say all of Disneyland and California Adventure. If right now I put you on the spot, you had to pick one food, what would it be?
Oh, gee. I love that Monte Cristo sandwich.
Yeah.
But, boy, I shouldn't have those, but I do love them.
I know. I've been on, since I started my job as a Disney travel agent and doing the podcast, I went from being a really super in shape marathoner to a really super out of shape marathoner. And, and I've been trying to, one of the reasons for starting my second podcast is to drop the weight that I put on and get back into shape for races. But you couldn't get me away from those Monte Cristos out there. I have one.
Yeah.
I have one. Yeah. They're phenomenal. You can't not.
Yeah.
Another thing I read in your book, I'm sorry, I'm still in Adventureland. I'm trying to move along. But another thing I noticed is, okay, so originally it was the Swiss Family Treehouse.
Yeah.
And now it's Tarzan's Treehouse.
Yeah.
And I noticed a little bit in your book that you weren't thrilled with the Tarzan's Treehouse.
That's true. It still brings back memories to go up in the treehouse. I love the treehouse, but they used to have all the workings of the Swiss Family treehouse with they had that waterworks thing where they pulled the water up and distributed the water through the pipes, through the bamboo pipes and everything. And it was just a marvelous thing where it was like you were actually in the movie. And then they changed it to where you're looking at these sort of diorama figures of Tarzan and Jane and the apes and all this kind of stuff. And you walk through it and it's kind of like being in a museum, but it's not like actually being there in the film, in the experience. And so I do miss the original treehouse, but I love it that the treehouse is still there. The original treehouse, the Enchanted Tiki Room and the Jungle Cruise are three attractions that are still there from Walt's era, even though the treehouse has been changed quite a bit.
Yeah. Now, I have to say again, trying to get you to come to Walt Disney World. You and I can meet up and have dinner. The treehouse in Magic Kingdom is still the Swiss Family Treehouse. And it still has the waterwork, the water machine and all that stuff going for it. And
fantastic.
So, yeah, they haven't changed that. So I love
it.
And before we went on a trip last year actually, when was it? January. I had my kids watch the movie so they could go through and get it when we walked through. Because they were little before and I didn't really walk them through there. But this last time we watched the film, they got it, they understood. And they got to walk through and enjoy it all. So it was really cool. So I love that. One thing to go back really quickly, I'm sorry, to the Tiki Room. I talked to Rolly Crump, and I know you listened to the interview, and thank you again, by the way, for listening to that.
That was such a great interview.
Jim, I got to tell you, I had no business interviewing him as early as I did. I had no idea what I was doing. He was so nice to take the time to talk to me because he was probably like, all right, dude, like you don't even know what you're doing. But he told me, and I actually couldn't leave it on the show. Rolly has a way with words where he lets loose a curse or two here and there. And I couldn't figure out how to use it with and still keep my G rating. So I had to actually cut it. But he told me a really funny story about how when he was doing the original clay models for the tikis, he was trying to do them inside, and they had air conditioning inside his studio, and they kept like getting solid too quickly, and he couldn't do it. They would stiffen up on him. So he actually ended up taking him out to the parking lot of the studio, and he used, this is a true story, he told me himself, a plastic fork and knife from the cafeteria to carve some of the features on the original tiki masks that they use that are still there in the tiki room. I thought
No kidding.
I thought that was the coolest thing.
That
Here's a guy who, he's a Disney legend, and he has his window on Main Street, and he's telling me, some guy who has no idea what he's doing as a podcaster, that he had no idea what he was doing when he was making these masks, and he carved them with plastic cutlery. So I thought that was really cool. And these guys who have done this stuff, at least I look at it as like these superhero guys. And when you talk to them, they're like, it was my job. Like I was doing what I had to do to get a job done because Walt wanted it done.
Yeah.
So it's so cool to have those conversations. And you and I both are so lucky to have been able to talk to these people who worked with Walt.
Yeah.
It's such a privilege.
Incredible. It
really, really is. Okay. Moving on, New Orleans Square. I was going to kind of combine Frontierland and New Orleans Square. So I heard a story, and I don't remember if I heard it in your book or not. The night before they had or maybe 2 nights before, they had the grand opening of Disneyland, the big televised one on July 17th, 1955. Mm-hmm. He had people into Disneyland for an anniversary party.
Correct.
And I heard a story. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It was a few days before. I forget exactly when, but yeah. It was Walt and Lillian's, I think their 35th anniversary.
So I heard a story that they were at the Golden Horseshoe, and it was up in, and I thought of this because we were just at the Golden Horseshoe a few weeks ago, and we were sitting and they were putting on the show, and I think it's so cool they still do that there. And we were looking up into like the little private boxes that are blocked off, and thinking that the one, I don't know which one was Walt's, but I know he had one of the 2 or 4. And I've always heard a story that he kind of jumped down on the stage from his own box. Have you heard that story about how when they were doing the show and he jumped onto the stage
That's absolutely true. It was actually their 30th wedding anniversary.
Okay.
And it was on Wednesday, July 13th. So it was 4 days before the park opened. And they celebrated their wedding anniversary, invited all these people. And it's one interesting thing about that event was that the party was scheduled for 6:00. Walt's out there in the front of the park waiting for his guests to start showing up, and at 6:00 nobody's there.
Oh man.
And he thought, oh my gosh, nobody's coming. And it turned out that they had this big traffic jam on the Santa Ana freeway, and it held everybody up. But eventually everybody came. But at first he thought no one was going to come to their anniversary party. But anyway, yeah, they Wally Bogue gave the very first performance of the show that had 50,000 performances or something like that, and in the course of that, Wally is shooting at Walt with blanks in his gun, and Walt is going bang bang bang, making a gun with his hand and shooting back, and then he actually climbed over the railing of this balcony box there, and like a stuntman, jumps down to the stage. And Lillian and Diane and Sharon, they all thought he was going to break his neck, but he landed there and then just grinned at the crowd, and they just had a wonderful party. It was a great time.
That's such a cool story, and I read that. They were all drinking a couple mint juleps along the rivers of America before that on the Mark Twain, and I read that he had one of his daughters drive him home that night after the party because maybe he got a little too excited that night and had a little too much fun. I
got the impression that he had a little too much fun. That's correct.
Yeah. But, he deserved it that night. Really.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
A guy who had worked his tail off to make that park a reality.
Yeah.
And in a year, that's what fascinates me. Like, how do you do that in a year?
Isn't that incredible?
It really is. Like, looking at, and listen, I don't mean to, I don't mean to bust Disney's chops now, but because the things they're building are, the technology and everything else is insane, but
sure,
he went from, a cleared out orange grove to a theme park with, who knows, in a year with dark rides in Main Street USA and,
sure,
and the Frontierland and Tomorrowland as it was. I understand it wasn't a huge thing back then, but still, in a year, it's amazing how much that guy could get accomplished.
Oh man, it wasn't all working when he got it when he opened up the park. There was a lot of stuff that was unfinished, but just the fact that he was able to open it and let people through the gate was incredible.
It really is. It blows me away that something that they announced. I guess they announced it in 1954, and it opened in 55. Am I crazy?
Yeah. Well, I know they broke ground on July 16, 1954.
Wow.
So it was a year and a day.
That's insane. It's insane. So, okay. So a couple more things in New Orleans Square and Frontierland. I'm sorry, I'm getting all mixed up.
Sure.
I read a story, and I don't think it was actually in your book, but I wanted to bring it up to you. The River Belle Terrace, where the river, I don't know if that's what it was then. I don't think it was one of Walt's favorite places to kind of go get a drink and get breakfast and sit out and watch the Mark Twain go by.
Yeah.
I've read that, so me being the complete Walt nerd that I am, I went and got one of the huge sticky buns from the River Belle and got a cup of coffee and sat out there on our last trip with the kids, and they were wondering why the heck we were sitting there for so long. But I had heard that that's where he used to kind of go in the morning and people watch and all that.
Yeah, so you got to sit there and imagine what it's like to be Walt.
I tried, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I tried to I looked at the pictures, the historical photos of where he was and what he did, and I tried to get inspired for the podcast and that kind of thing. So yeah, my wife and they all think I'm crazy, but that's what I do. And then I read about, so one thing that I know that he, and this is something that I read in your book too, about Tom Sawyer Island and how kind of instrumental he was in the building of that and exactly what he wanted that to be.
Yeah. Because everything else he sort of said, this is what I want. Then he handed it off to people and they ran with it and designed it and then he critiqued it and improved it and so forth. But the island was his. I'm trying to remember who it was that he had originally assigned to sort of plot that out. But anyway, he didn't like the design that this artist came up with. So he said he took the design back to his barn, spent a night just drawing it up on his own, came back and presented the island. Here's the way it should be. And he had everything in place exactly the way he wanted it, the mill and the tree house and all the different features, the Castle Rock and the Fort Wilderness and all that kind of stuff. He put it all there himself. So that is the place that was actually designed by Walt by his own hand. And it's kind of unfortunate that it's been changed as much as it has, but it's still, to be rethemed for Pirates of the Caribbean. But I still feel that a lot of the original Walt Island is there and can still be enjoyed. So the biggest thing that I grieve about, that we've lost on Tom Sawyer Island is Fort Wilderness, because I loved to go there as a kid, and I loved to take my kids there when I was for the family vacations and so forth, and now it's not there anymore. So
yeah, they built like is it like a cast member break room or something where it used to be, or a
yeah, it's a dressing staging area for the Fantasmic show, and I think they call it Fort Wilderness, but it's not the log fort. It's just it's made out of 2x4s that have been painted brown.
Right. It's not accessible to the public anymore,
right.
To guests.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a bummer. I never got to see that. It's kind of a bummer for me. I've been on the island out there, and it's such a cool thing though that there's something that I know it's been redone, but it is a cool thing about Disneyland is that there's all these places that Walt personally had a hand in. He walked, like Walt Disney or Disneyland, I'm sorry, has the Walk in Walt's Footsteps tour, and it's really what you're doing. I mean, it's crazy that we talked about it last time, like things that have literally still have Walt's fingerprints on them.
Yes.
And yeah, that's one of them. It's so cool. And it's the thing that fascinates me about Disneyland itself is how much time he spent there, and it's very, very cool. All right, I've had you for 43 minutes. I don't want to keep you much longer, but a couple other things I want to talk about. Now, last time I had you on, we didn't talk about. Did we talk about It's a Small World? I don't think we did.
No, I don't think so.
So, Walt, I wanted to kind of. So, Small World was created for the 64-65 World's Fair, and we talked about. I've talked about on my show how it was Walt came into the Imagineers one day and said, "There's this little piece of land left at the World's Fair, and I want to put a boat ride there." And that eventually, of course, became It's a Small World. I've read a little bit about it, about getting it back to Disneyland and like where it is and all that. Do you have any kind of background, any stories, any info on exactly how that got back to Disneyland, or why it kind of came back there?
Well, I would say that, of course, with all those attractions, I think Walt's plan was these companies and the state of Illinois are going to build these attractions. They're going to pay for the building of the attractions. We'll design them. We'll put them in the World's Fair, and then we'll bring them back to Disneyland. And I have no idea how they disassemble, crate it up, and move it back. But in any case, that was his original plan. And the thing about the Small World that I think is really fascinating, and it took me a little while to track this down because I was trying to figure out whose original initial idea It's a Small World was, and it was Walt's. Like everything else, it all began with Walt. He actually had this plan for putting in an attraction that would feature singing children from all around the world, presenting this view of a united world where everybody's in harmony, peace and harmony, and so forth. All the ethnicities and races and everything just singing together, singing one song together. He had this idea long before the World's Fair. And apparently Pepsi wanted to have an attraction at the World's Fair. They were late getting into the game for some reason because the board couldn't get their act together or whatever. And finally, they went to Admiral Fowler, who was in charge of Joe Fowler was Walt's chief of construction, and wanted to have the Disney company produce this attraction for them. And Joe Fowler said, "Oh, it's too late," and he turned him down. And then Joan Crawford, who was actress Joan Crawford, who was a friend of Walt's, was on the Pepsi board, and so she went to Walt and said, "How come your company turned us down?" And Walt said, "I didn't know anything about that." And then she explained that Joe Fowler turned them down, and so Walt goes to Fowler and says, "We're going to do this." And then he goes to his artist and he says, "We're going to do this." And he knows exactly the attraction he wants to build because he's been wanting to build this at Disneyland for the longest time. And now Pepsi's going to pay for it, and UNICEF is going to benefit from it at the World's Fair, and then he'll bring it back to the park. So that's how that all came about. And Walt was the instigator.
It's so cool that it's amazing to think, right, that he himself who had the idea for Disneyland, who had the idea for all these attractions, for Tom Sawyer Island, for It's a Small World. He just came up with this stuff and just said, like, okay, I've heard jokes about Steve Jobs being an innovator, and I've heard there's a comedian named Bill Burr, who I love, who says, he wasn't an innovator. He went into a room and said, "See all my records? I want them on something that can fit into my hand. Get it done." And it makes me laugh because it's probably kind of true. But Walt actually designed these things, sketched them out on a piece of paper, handed it to somebody and said, "All right, this is what we need. Go do it." Like, it's fascinating to think that he could think of these things that lasted for 60 plus years. 50, 60 years. I mean, I know Small World was in the 60s, but you're looking at Enchanted Tiki Room was in the 60s, and then Main Street USA was 1955, and it's unbelievable that these things still are, now they're like completely timeless.
They are.
It's unbelievable. And the one story, I'm sorry to bring it up, another story up, but the one thing that I heard from Rolly Crump again that I was thinking of when I was in Disneyland a few weeks ago, and I was laughing so much at was there are trees on top of the Small World building. And
I love that story.
Oh, you've heard the story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I heard it in the podcast. It's a wonderful story. Go ahead and tell it.
Yeah. I forgot that it was right. I forgot that it had made a podcast. So they were in the park, I guess, or whatever, designing the facade of It's a Small World, and they had these trees that they were going to put around the building, and they didn't have anywhere to put them. So Rolly, and I forget what Imagineer he was working with, just stuck them on top of the model of the building, just to put them out of the way so they can get stuff done. And Walt shows up a few minutes early. They didn't expect him. And he says, Rolly, I love what you did with the trees on top of the building. I love that look. Let's do that. And Rolly and the other Imagineers start cracking up laughing. And they say, Walt, we just put them up there because we didn't have anywhere to put them. It was an accident. And he said, no, you know what? It looks good. Go with it. And they're still there. Yeah. And I love that. I looked at them, like I said, a couple weeks ago, and I laughed because I was like, here's this guy, Rolly Crump, who did it. This was an accident, just to get them out of the way. And Walt made the call in, what was it, 1965, 66, and they're still there. I love that. You
look at that, and it gives depth to the facade. It feels like it's more integral to the landscape, but it's just trees built on top of a roof of a show building.
It does. It makes it. It almost makes it look like there's nothing behind that facade. Yeah, because the trees are all growing out of it, and again, it's such a simple thing, but it makes all the difference when you're there looking at it. It's awesome.
Accidental brilliance, huh?
It really is. It's okay. So I wanted to talk to you about the Matterhorn before you go. Before I know you have other things to do, but you had told me that you had a couple stories about the Matterhorn that you wanted to talk about, or at least one story, and I wanted to mention that and talk about that before I let you go.
This is something that I discovered after I wrote the book, and so I guess I'll have to do another edition of the book and put this in, but I had thought that the origin of the Matterhorn was when Walt took this trip with Ken Anakin to film the movie Third Man on the Mountain, and they get to the village there, and they look up, and there's the Matterhorn, and at that moment, Walt thinks, I've got to have this at Disneyland. So of course he went into a souvenir shop, got a picture postcard of the Matterhorn, and wrote out the address to Vic Green, who was a Imagineer, and he said, Vic, build this, because they'd been talking about an attraction for this particular site where the Matterhorn is now. Anyway, I thought that was the origin of the Matterhorn story, but it actually is not, because the site of the Matterhorn was a place called, they had various names, but they called it Holiday Hill usually. And what it was a 20-foot tall mound of dirt that had been dredged up out of the castle moat. When they dug the moat, they put the dirt right there where the Matterhorn is today, and it was this hill. And Bill Evans, the horticulturist, had gone, landscaped it, put grass and shrubs and so forth. They put a fence around it to keep people out. Prior to 1959, when they put up the Matterhorn. So here was Holiday Hill. People were supposed to stay out of there, but sometimes couples would use it for like a lover's lane. And there's even a legend, I don't know if this is true or not, but it is said that a cast member actually cultivated marijuana on that hill for a while. And
I hadn't heard that one. I had heard the couples thing, but I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah. And so when Walt was thinking of something to do with that hill, and his initial idea, once again, going back to his childhood in Marceline, he remembered tobogganing down the snowy hills there outside of town. And so he suggested to Joe Fowler that they get a snow making machine and cover that hill with snow and have toboggan runs even in the middle of the summer. And Joe Fowler said, no way are we going to do that. Where is all this water going to run off when the snow melts? And so Walt said, well, we got to keep thinking about it. But look at that idea there. Walt is thinking about using that space, that hill, as a toboggan run. And what is it today? Well, it's a toboggan run. It's a bobsled run. And but he just wasn't thinking big enough. And when he got to Switzerland and saw the Matterhorn, his eyes lit up. Now the idea was big enough to build. But the original idea was a toboggan run on a little 20-foot hill, and now it's a 147-foot mountain. And the actual genesis of it was from his childhood, tobogganing down, sledding down the hills outside of Marceline, Missouri.
That is such a cool story.
Yeah,
Again, I obviously had heard the same story that you had heard with the postcard and the build this, and so cool to think that he had that idea years before the ground was ever broken on Holiday Hill.
Yeah, it's a case of plussing. You know, he starts out with a 20-foot tall hill, and he plusses it to a mountain,
to a slightly bigger hill.
Yeah.
At this point. And I remember reading your book too, that every time he mentioned the Matterhorn, people were like, "No, can't do it. It's impossible." Yeah. The architect said it's impossible, and then he would just kind of smile and be like, "Yeah." And there it is, and it's done, and it's been in operation since you know, I think he's at 59. I mean, it's that's insane to me. So cool. And the guy was such a thinker and so ahead of his time.
Absolutely.
And I was born, I guess, 12 years after he passed away, and I still to this day read every single piece of information I can find on him. Yeah. Just because it's so inspirational.
He doesn't get credit for being the creative person that he was. People acknowledge him as a businessman, and but he was really an extremely creative, idea-driven person, and his creative medium was people. He achieved everything he did through other people. He was a master at recognizing talent and drawing people to use their talent to the utmost. He pushed them to achieve more than they could ever imagine they could achieve.
Yeah, it's so true. Like Blaine Gibson had never sculpted anything, and then he's like, "Blaine, you're going to sculpt this for me." And then Blaine Gibson ends up being this, famous sculptor and an Imagineer, and and getting his window on Main Street. And the same thing with Existencio, had been an animator or and then he ends up being a songwriter, and he also scripts the auctioneer scene at Pirates of the Caribbean. He had never done a storyboard before, but Walt says, "I know you can do it, so you're going to do it." And these guys do it, and they do these crazy, amazing things. Yeah. And Walt saw that in them, and he pulled it out of them, and he knew they could do it.
And how did he know that? It's beyond me.
It's fascinating. It really is.
Yeah.
To think that this guy could just see that in people. I don't know. He had an amazing sense and an amazing trust that his cast members, I guess, could get that kind of thing done. It's just amazing. Sure. So last question for you, and I'll let you go.
Okay.
But you, in the book, and not in this one, in How to Be Like Walt, you mentioned that you never heard, and you interviewed a lot of people who knew Walt and who worked with Walt for that book.
Pat Williams did most of the interviews in that book, but yeah.
Right, and you guys said that you never heard anyone talk about Walt as being cruel or being abusive, and I've had the same experience. I've had the really incredible opportunity to talk to some people who've worked with Walt and who who are Imagineers, and recently I got a chance to talk to Marty Sklar, and horrible to hear that just a few days later he passed away.
Yeah.
And we talked about Walt for a couple minutes, and I had the same experience that I've never heard one person who knew Walt say even one bit of a bad thing about him. Why do you? It's weird. Why do you think still, to this day, it's 2017, that these rumors and these stories about Walt being all these things that he wasn't, why are they still out there? Why do they still persist today?
Yeah, there are a lot of things out there, and it sickens me every time I hear it because we have disproven so much of this, through the interviews that we've done, people that we've talked to. There are a few people like Art Babbitt who, the animator who
Right.
led the strike back in 1941, and Bill Peet, I think, had a grudge against Walt for some stuff, but there were all the people that we talked to, the Sherman brothers and so many others that we talked to have just said nothing but wonderful things about Walt. They just loved him, and the accusations of anti-Semitism, which came out of that horrible book, The Hollywood's Dark Prince, and there was none of that stuff existed before that book was published. So. And that came from Art Babbitt. That was those accusations came from Art Babbitt, who had a king-size axe to grind. So a guy with an axe to grind tells a story to a guy who's writing a book, a hit piece type book, and then it gets out there in the marketplace, and there are a lot of people who just love to tear down icons, who love to tear down success and tear down people who are admired, and that's the only thing I can think of to explain why these false stories that have been disputed again and again keep popping up again from people like Meryl Streep and so forth. But there's just nothing to it. We've demonstrated that through the interviews that we've done in these books, and so I hope that this is reassuring to people, because it is terrible to think that there are children who look up to Walt and his creations, who then hear some of these stories, and it makes them wonder, well, was Walt really this terrible person? And no, he wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, there's, and that was kind of like with me, like when I've read, there are a couple biographies on him that kind of paint, and listen, was he an angel? Absolutely not. The guy had his vices, and he had from what I've read, he had a foul mouth, and he smoked and he drank, and he was a guy in the 50s and 60s. I mean, he was what you would expect a guy in the 50s and 60s to be. But
he was not a perfect person, like you say, and we acknowledge all of that. We acknowledged it in How to Be Like Walt, and I've acknowledged it in Walt's Disneyland. But you have to just put that in perspective. And he actually was ahead of his time in terms of elevating women in his organization. He's accused of being a misogynist, and that's absolutely not true. I mean, Mary Blair and so many other women artists and animators in his organization were treated. He was very upfront about the fact that if women do equal work, they deserve equal pay and equal promotion and so forth. He said that explicitly back in the 1940s, and that was not the most common viewpoint back in that era. So he was ahead of his time in his treatment of people and his fairness and his equality.
absolutely, and you had the Sherman brothers who, when talk about anti-Semitism, absolutely adored Walt, and Richard Sherman still says up to this day, I mean, there's not a big Disney event that he doesn't attend still because of his love for Walt Disney. And I think it was the actor who was in Song of the South, James Basket, however you say his name.
Yeah.
Walt campaigned for him to get the honorary Oscar that he ended up getting because he was not allowed to attend the Academy Awards. So he was discriminated against by Hollywood. Right. Yeah. So I think I thank you for saying all that stuff, because I agree, and I'd like to get that out there, because so many times I'll do a podcast and mention Walt, and I get negative feedback, and it kind of drives me crazy. Yeah, it really does. I am so glad you asked. That is a great question. I'm glad you asked. Oh no, thanks. And I read it in your book again. I read it almost for the third time today because I was skimming through it to make sure I remembered everything I wanted to ask you. And and I will read it again. And again, Jim's book, if you want to buy it, is Walt's Disneyland. It's still there if you know where to look. And you can get it on Amazon, right, Jim? And where else can people find it?
Well, right now it's just on Amazon, but I'm going to be releasing it with, for Apple and Barnes and Noble, Kobo, and those different formats. I'm going to put it in the other formats as well.
Sure. So the other e-readers and all that stuff.
Yes, but it's available in paperback and for the Kindle.
And I have both copies, and I actually gave away a copy tonight. I recorded a Facebook Live. Well, I didn't record. It was a Facebook Live video, and I gave one away tonight. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Oh, no. Jim, my pleasure. And it's been so awesome to talk to you. And thank you so much for coming on. And listen, if you'd be up for it, I'd love to have you on again down the road to talk more Walt and whatever else, Reggie White, whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, I would love that. And it's been a joy talking to you tonight.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. And that is going to do it for this week's episode of the Ear to There podcast. Thank you so much again to my guest, Jim Denney. I could sit and talk about Walt Disney and Disneyland's early days, and I have done it, for hours and hours and hours. So having Jim on 2 shows was a whole lot of fun for me. So Jim, if you're listening to this, and I know, or at least I think you are, thank you again for being on. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this show and the episode before. Someone who's a lot smarter than me once told me to make the podcast that you want to listen to. So that's what I'm doing. I love talking about Disneyland. I love talking about Walt Disney. So I hope you enjoyed this one. This one was a lot of fun for me. And if you did enjoy it, I just ask that you tell someone about it. You probably have a big Walt Disney or Disneyland fan in your life. Please tell them about the show. I'd really appreciate it. And I'd love to have new listeners on board each and every week. So thank you in advance for telling anyone about the show. All right, just remember, there will be a new episode of the Ear to There podcast each and every Monday morning, as well as a new episode of the Ear to There podcast, Walt Disney World Word of the Week, each and every Wednesday morning. So thank you again so much for listening in advance, and thank you for putting up with my speech, I guess, and the way I've been talking the last couple episodes. I grind my teeth at night, and I didn't wear my guard, and I accidentally bit my tongue, and I've had a very painful and difficult time talking. So I'm going to stop right here. That's why I sound funny. So have a great week. Thank you again for listening. See you next week. Bye-bye.